All right, Derek Piper's on vacation, but we got to talk some hoops. So I called in the big gun, Mike LaTulip, to talk some Illinois basketball. What's going on, Mike? The offseason never sleeps, even though it's May.
Yeah, man, just got back from Iceland. Had a great week-long trip out there. Just
Did Ryan Rosillas vlog or thing?
It's actually really funny you say that because Isabel and I, my wife, were already debating going to Iceland, and I'm an avid Rosillo listener. And then once he put up that travel pod, it kind of pushed us over the edge. I think whenever that pod came out, like mid-August, the trip was booked August 22nd, if that gives you any indication. So, but it was amazing, man. It was, it's so easy to get around, and it's only a 5.5 hour flight from Chicago, which was pretty crazy for feeling like you're in another world. You really didn't have to go that far, but all in all, man, it was pretty incredible.
I'm looking forward to it. Like, how would you describe it to people? I know this could probably go an hour conversation.
Yeah, the best way to describe it is just in order to fully experience it, you have to, like, I drove over 20 hours when I was there. We got a rental car, and when you fly into the west side of Iceland, which is where Reykjavik is, you really have to drive one way or the other around the ring road, which is really one road that goes around all of Iceland. So we went down the south coast, and it's a 6-hour drive to get to where we were going, but we did it in 4 days because even when you're driving 2 hours, it's a 9-hour day because there's so many things you're stopping and seeing on the way to that next hotel, waterfalls and glacial lagoons and just things that here in the Midwest, you're not going to get much of. So it looked like, honestly, like some shit out of like Game of Thrones. And
I think they did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like Interstellar did some film some scenes there and stuff. So it was wild, man. We got just a ton of pictures. It's funny, my wife, I think she took 1,400 pictures when we were there. And she's like, how many did you take? I was like, I think 60. So I leave that to her, but we have, plenty of pictures, but also plenty of memories because it was a hell of an experience, man.
Well, I was still getting texts from Mike while he was over there because there's stuff going on with Illinois basketball. And, of course, the NBA playoffs going on as well. So it's a fun time for basketball. But Illinois has made an addition. We'll talk about a potential addition they want to add as well. But Quincy Guerrier out of Oregon via Syracuse, former top 100 recruit, fifth-year transfer, commits to Illinois, signs with Illinois. Mike, you dove into the film of this transfer forward. What do you think he brings to the team?
Yeah, I think I texted you after I did a bit of a deep dive, and admittedly, I really did come away from it liking him more than I thought I did / would. And the first things first, just his feel. And I know Pipes talked about this a little bit, but for some older guys, that just happens, right? You just have good feel because just from sheer experience, you've been around college basketball, but he's had that since Syracuse. He has it. Like, that's who he is as a player. And I'll give you a quick example. Back in the 2021 NCAA tournament, and some of this stuff is going to sound trivial, but it's really important to have guys like this. But in the 2021 NCAA tournament, they're playing West Virginia, round of 32 game to get to the Sweet 16, a game that he had 5 blocks in and was a really key piece. But there was a stretch and a sequence in that game where he gets a defensive rebound, right, and outlets it to Joe Girard. Girard's dribbling up the floor, and to kind of encapsulate what type of feel he has, he's sprinting the floor. He looks up, he sees that his man sprinted all the way back in transition, and he's heading the hole under the basket. So now Quincy's looking around and saying, who can I screen for? And he signals to Buddy Boeheim, and he's screaming like, I'm getting you, I'm getting you, I'm getting you. And he sprints in, and he's looking over his shoulder as he's doing it because he knows that if his guy stays under the basket, that if he lays wood, it's either Buddy Boeheim coming off clean, or if somebody ends up committing, then he's open on the pick and pop. So he just crashes down on that pin down. Boeheim comes screaming off, hits a 3. And that's not a set play. That's not like, that is just him being a basketball player. And then the next play, they go back in that 2-3 zone. And when you're he played the wing most in the 2-3 zone. So you guard your area, but also because that low man in the center has, it was Edwards this year for them, but their 5-man when he was there, when that ball goes to the middle, that's the 5-man's responsibility. So your job on the wing is any back cuts, anything to the basket, you have to take away. So after he has that play, that pin down for Boeheim, he comes down and ball gets under the middle. His guy back cuts. He discourages the back cut and then realizes because his guy cut through, his corner's empty. So he shades over. The guy dribbling in the middle of the floor does a spin move right into Quincy's lap, jumps up, two-hand block shot, jump ball, Syracuse ball. Like that type of stuff is what he brings to the table. And I think it's what this staff loves so much about him, because even when he went to Oregon, there was just more freedom there defensively because he wasn't locked into just one side of the court, to, in that zone. So, but the other thing that I really like when you watch him, when you break down the film, that Wisconsin game in the NIT, it's a Big Ten team, right? You're playing Tyler Wall. The way he held up in the post, he's always talking. His head is always on a swivel. This sounds crazy, but plays with his arms out. Like always. His arms are always out. And so you end up playing bigger. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think you unlock a little bit more of him as an offensive player when you do have shooting around him, because he's such a good screener and because he's a heady screener. So when you had Joe Girard and Alan Griffin and Buddy Boeheim on that team, he was flying around. He knew when to screen. He knew how to screen, and it freed him up in return. And that's why he was 14 a game, because he knows how to play. And the last thing that I'll say is a lot of guys that are 14 a game and play the way that he played his sophomore year, where you look and you're like, oh, he scored. I mean, this guy scored over 20 points 10 plus times in his career. Like he can score. Mm-hmm. But when you go to Oregon and you have a lesser role, are you still worth a damn? And he is. So that's what encourages me about this addition, because no matter what his role is on this team, do I think he's going to be 14, 15 a game at Illinois? I don't. But even if he isn't, it's still a really good addition because of how he raises your floor. And that seems to be a trend for their additions that they've picked up in this offseason.
Absolutely. I know some people don't love comp game. I think it can be informative as long as people don't understand, like, hey, this is definitely what the guy's going to be. Is there a recent guy in the Big Ten that you comp him to? Like I was sitting there thinking like a Joey Hauser type player. I mean, Joey is an unbelievable shooter, right? Like he turned into one of the elite shooters in the Big Ten the last couple of years. But you're talking about feel. You're talking about maybe not the most explosive athlete, but a guy who just seems to impact winning and can score and be kind of a complimentary scorer.
Yeah, I think you've had a few four-men in the league, and I think about some of the ones that, honestly, he reminds me of some of those Nebraska guys. Not necessarily like a James Palmer, but some of those guys that can step out and do other things, and those guys become matchup issues because you can slide him to the five, and I like that about him, because we've seen the trend with Brad Underwood where it's like, hey, I need to recruit and go get guys that fit this squad, but I need to recruit and go get guys that fit if we have these returners come back, or these guys that are in the draft come back. So I think he fits that type of mold, where I just think about all the guys in 2022 that DeMonte had to guard, right? Where you're giving up some size. He can step out. He can shoot. He can take you in the post. He can do those things. So, Hauser's
suing with a better jumper, like something like that.
That I hope not. But I do think that
I think a 21 version of suing, I guess.
Yeah. We're like, he's a guy that has some size, hopefully won't have as many pivot fadeaways. But when sticking on Hauser, Quincy's a good shooter. Like Quincy, mechanically, it's all there. And he's a guy that's going to shoot a higher percentage with the right pieces around him. And when you surround him with guys that can also shoot and guys that can create, a guy that we may be talking about soon here. So yeah, Hauser, he's a better defender than Hauser. So where Hauser's maybe a little bit better offensively in some areas, I think Quincy's kind of evens it out with what he does on the defensive end.
Mike, we know they're going to add more. We'll get to Rayj Dennis here in a minute. But another one-year guy, add to Marcus Damask, add to Justin Harmon, as currently constituted. No Coleman Hawkins, no Terrence Shannon, like no Rayj Dennis yet. Like, what do you think of what this staff has done this offseason, how they've approached it, how they've handled it?
Yeah, I think we talked about patience pretty early on, and they've exhibited that, and they're being patient in the areas that I think mean the most. And when I say that point guard position, you didn't just want to freak out and go grab the first guy that's out there. You want to find somebody that makes the most sense and is a great fit. And but I also think there's something to be said about the way they've gone about this, getting these older guys, because people talk about all the time about getting old, staying old. Oh man, a lot of experience, guys that have been in a long time. But what does that mean, right? Why is that important? And it's not just, hey, they have mileage, or hey, they've been in this game, they've seen this. I think, to me, the most important thing when it comes to having older, experienced guys, it doesn't mean they're always mistake-free defensively. It doesn't mean they're always mistake-free offensively. It doesn't mean that now you will not have bad losses. Those things happen. It's the turnaround time. That, what older guys know is that you can't wallow in what's happened, right? A turnover, a shooting slump, 2 straight losses to teams that maybe you should beat. Whereas with younger guys, that thing spirals a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And when younger guys are counted on more, now that's going to impact your team at a higher level. So when you have guys that have been through the trials and tribulations of college basketball, they know what the deal is. Like, they know that, hey, we lost the tough one. We lost one we shouldn't have. Boom, let's move on to the next one. Like, we know we have to turn the page. And that's where I think you can, if they go and get the guys that they're targeting right now, and you get one of these 2 draft guys back, that can be a better team than last year, because I think you'll have more consistency. Yeah. And that's really going to be the barometer when you talk about last year's team to this year, to this upcoming year's team, is, who are we going to see game in and game out? Because that was the problem last year, was which team's going to show up. Okay, it seems like this team today. Let's see if they can pull out a win. You're getting guys that I think completely raise your floor and make you a much more competent basketball team. And that's no slight on the guys that played last year. That's just what happens with a younger team. You just have way more peaks and valleys than you would with a team that's older.
Well, Mike LaTulip, we no longer have to speculate. Rayj Dennis, the MAC Player of the Year, star guard at Toledo, has entered the portal. He's available as one of the best transfers on the market. We know Illinois is interested in Rayj. We know Rayj has some interest in Illinois. If they're able to land Rayj Dennis, what would he bring to Illinois for his 1 season left?
Yeah, obviously been rumored for a bit now. So glad that we can finally talk about it. I mean, the fit makes total sense. Not only just for Illinois, I think we think about it through the lens of Illinois. Like, man, this makes a lot of sense for Illinois, but does it make sense for the kid? And I think it does. And he's a guy that I think can come in and thrive in this system. I think you can start running a lot more high ball screens with him. And now you've added another pick and pop threat if Coleman can't come back. And he's a guy that I think can really amplify a guy like Dane Danger. I think I saw Chester tweeting the other day, and this is something that we talked about on film last year, was like, dude, shuffling out of these ball screens, like, turn and sprint. Turn it, like, watch Anthony Davis. And I'm not comparing Anthony Davis to Dane Danger, but Anthony Davis, like, the reason why he put so much strain at the rim and in the paint is because when he sets screens, he sprints to the rim. And it pulls in the defense. Now you got shooters that you've brought in, and all that ties together. So I think Rayj Dennis is a guy that, when you watch him, although they played a frantic system at Toledo, it wasn't like Grinnell, where they're trying to score like 130 points a game, but they were trying to get high possession games, and a lot of times that can get into this like helter-skelter type game, and he still limited his turnovers. I mean, even in his pick and roll play types, like, he was an 11% turnover rate is low. Like, that's really low for a guy that's handling it as much as he is and only turning it over 1 out of every 10 times he comes off a ball screen. That's pretty nuts. I mean, for contrast, and I know he wasn't a point guard, but when Fletcher McGee was in college, he was something like a 30% turnover rate when he came off a ball screen. So, like, some guys aren't built for that. Rayj Dennis is, and even in a hectic offensive system, he still kept his turnovers down, which is impressive. And even defensively, I think there wasn't a ton that was asked of him at Toledo, but you could see moments where his length really helped. Trotter and I have gone back and forth trying to speculate his wingspan. Brandon Paul was a guy that was 6'3" with a 6'10" wingspan. Rayj looks like a guy with a 6'8", 6'9" wingspan, and that helps you when, when you're a guy that now, if you go to Illinois, you have to turn it on a little bit more on that end, and you already have the length. Like that helps you in a major way. But then the last thing I'll mention with him, if you do end up getting him, I think about these other additions that you have. I've already mentioned what he can do for Dane Danger, but you don't have to rely on Harmon to be as much of a ball handler, which is good for Harmon. Because he's such a threat in pick and roll, Rayj Dennis, maybe that opens up more catch and shoot opportunities for Marcus Domas, right? Where I think he can thrive. And then Quincy Guerrier, you're a guy that is a pick and pop threat, which pairs well with Rayj Dennis. And then because Rayj has such good vision and because you're adding more shooting, now Quincy becomes even more of a threat because of his screening. So you can see how it all ties together, even just alone with the additions that you've made. And now when you bring back Terrence and you bring back Coleman, same type of thing with Coleman, pick and pop. You get more older guys around Coleman to be able to make even more of an impact defensively. We saw what he did with less experience defensively last year. And then for Terrence, I think you allow Terrence to play a role that emulates a little bit more of what he would be in the NBA, which is catch and shoot, occasional slasher, and really solid defensively. Because that's the other thing. Same thing with Coleman. I think Terrence can be an even better defender with more competent defenders around him.
And you think about Terrence just being able to go in transition with a guy like Rayj Dennis who can really push it and find people. He's a great distributor, Mike. What do you think every guy that goes up a level has a transition to that level. Jameer Young handled it very well last year. We've seen some mid-major transfer point guards come in here and do really, really well. What do you think his transition will be? What do you think his adjustment will be?
Yeah, I think because he played a role that is going to be similar. Like he comes to Illinois, he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. And he's obviously comfortable doing that. And, he's also played in the Mountain West, which is a level above the MAC. And he did have a good, a couple solid seasons there as well. He's a guy that was almost 20 a game this year. And I see him being a guy that with the usage that he would have, being in that 14, 15 a game type range. And if Terrence comes back, that Terrence, I would imagine, would still be in that kind of 17, 18 type range as well, but in a way that I think complements him more. I think Terrence can be even more efficient with a guy like Rayj around him. So I think Rayj's adjustment is probably even more on the defensive end than it would be on the offensive end. I think he has such command and great pace on that end that the big adjustment is how he's going to hold up on the defensive end. I think the one thing, if I were to nitpick, and like I said, maybe it's because there wasn't as much required of him on that end, but he has a little bit of a proclivity to run into ball screens. If you know me, if you've seen film sessions, it's a bugaboo of mine. So, but he has the proper foot speed and length to be able to get over those, because it's effort, man. Like that's really what it comes down to. So if he can do that, he really turns himself into a really well-rounded player that I think can truly be like an all Big Ten type of ceiling, if he were to come in and make that type of impact.
Yeah, the match makes sense. Of course, the timing of this will be interesting. If he continues to go through the draft process, we'll see if he gets an NBA draft combine invite. That'll be known in the next week or so, I would believe. So that maybe has to play out. But now that he's entered the portal, I imagine this process will go pretty quick. But Mike, if you're Illinois, you want to get it done as quickly as possible, because everyone should want, like, everybody that needs a point guard should be in on this guy.
Yeah. And if you see some of these coaches recruit around the country, some of the coaches that have a point guard right now don't care. They'll go after him too, because there's different schools of thought with how you recruit in the portal right now. I mean, some are just like, hey, load up. I mean, Eric Musselman's theory is like, and I actually think there's some intellect to it. I mean, I know you can see memes floating around or whatever about like, oh, of course Arkansas is reaching out. But hey, look, man, if you're going to go out and get 4 transfers, or let's call it 6, like you go out and get 6 transfers, 2 might leave after next year, right? And 2 other ones might not pan out. So you don't want that to be your only 4. So you go get 6. Hey, 2 of them may pop. And if 2 of them pop, then I look like a genius. So there's that school of thought. And then there's probably more of what Brad Underwood's doing, where it's like, hey, let's play for fit. a little bit here. Let's have some contingency plans, right? Let's recruit as if we may get back Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins, but also if we don't, we're still in a good spot regardless. So the timing of this is going to be super interesting because not only do you have Rayj, who's going through the process and very well could get a combine invite, you have other schools having conversations with them. And who knows, man? I mean, with NIL, it could come down to just a price tag. But I do think that, for a guy like Rayj, he could set himself up really well long-term, more than just short-term, to be able to come in, get some decent NIL, no question, but also prepare himself where he honestly, like, he's a guy that could be an NBA draft pick after next season. Proving it at the high major level and being able to facilitate the way he does. And if he shoots it well enough, he's going to be in that type of conversation. So, or he's a guy that projects in that way. So it's going to be a fascinating next few weeks to see how this all shakes out.
Yeah, saw a guy from the MAC get drafted a couple of years ago as a point guard, and Jason Preston, who Illinois saw up close. Last thing for you, Mike. Speaking of the NBA draft, I mean, from what we've heard, I think you've heard the same thing. Like, it's weird to me. I can't really balance this in my mind that it feels like Terrence Shannon is more likely to come back than Coleman Hawkins. And hey, if Coleman's going to be a draft pick, whatever it is, that's odd to me. Of course, we still got to let this play out. Sounds like Coleman's going to be at the NBA draft combine, which is not a surprise. Terrence should be able to go there too. But what do you think as we enter the critical evaluation period for those two guys and what it means for Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, I think the landscape on this has changed with NIL because it's almost bad business to completely show your hand one way or the other in terms of whether or not you're coming back or whether you're staying in the draft. And but also at the same time, a lot still has to play out with workouts and the combine. And I know Coleman's got a combine invite already, correct?
I believe, yeah.
Does Terrence?
I can't imagine he won't.
Right? I mean, I feel like he'd be another guy that would get an invite. So even with the combine still a few weeks away, we're still we're still in the early stages of what this is gonna look like. And what's crazy is, I mean, back in January, did we think either of these guys would even come back? I mean, Coleman, like, we didn't. So the fact they're even in this position to potentially get one of them back is. I
mean, the moment Terrence Shannon committed to Illinois, I thought he was gone after 1 year. So the fact that it's a possibility that he comes back and maybe like even a 50-50 kind of deal, maybe better than that. Like, I mean, if you get Terrence Shannon back, that is massive. Coleman Hawkins is huge. I think he brings so much value, but to get a 23-year-old guard of that size, athleticism, experience, scoring ability, that'd be such a coup to get him back.
And this goes without saying, but if you get both of these guys back, it's your top two additions of the offseason. Probably right there with, Rayj's obviously would be super important as well, but getting two guys coming back that have been in the program that are those caliber of players and that are really kind of plug and play in a way. And I don't think either of those guys would really take away from what you expect from these other additions. But, Coleman in particular, this is a big next few weeks for him because, we've seen guys really help their stock tremendously during this May period. And if you surprise people with your measurements and your shooting ability, we've seen guys stock take off overnight. I mean, Jake LaRavia last year, I mean, you talk about a guy who's late combine, like back half combine invite, has such a good day at the combine, shot the hell out of it in shooting drills. And then I'm not saying it's because he was a white guy, but same thing with Pat Connaughton, right? Like these guys, when you surprise people with your agility measurements and some of your other measurements, I mean, Jake LaRavia took himself out of the scrimmages. I mean, that's how good he felt about his stock and how good his agent probably felt about his stock after that day. So you could have Coleman Hawkins telling you that he's coming back for the next 3 weeks, but until he goes to the combine, if he's a guy that, because this is the way I look at Coleman, he is a guy that I think scouts aren't expecting a ton from agility wise. And when I say that, I mean his 3-cone drill, his shuttle runs, but he's a guy that because there's low expectations, has room to move up
Yep.
if he surprises people. And then if you look at his 3-point shooting percentage, which I think was what, 30% this year?
28, I think. Yeah.
28. Like, he's a guy that when I watch him shooting warm-ups when I'm at the State Farm Center, when I go to shoot around sometimes, like, he's a guy that could go to the combine and shoot the hell out of it.
Yep.
And now you're looking in like, whoa, he's already got all the tools. He's 6'10". Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's crazy to think that if Coleman Hawkins has himself a day at the combine, that he somehow finds himself in like the late first round. It's totally possible.
And let's be honest, the situation for him was not great last year. Like, he didn't have anybody getting open for him. Like, the offense was stagnant. It was not a great situation for him. So I can see him succeeding a little bit more when it opens up a little bit.
Yeah, and too, like, to play devil's advocate, or just to play the other side of this too. And Terrence, I think, falls under this umbrella too. I think there's something to be had for both of them coming back. Because I'll I mean, I'll shift to Terrence here, but he's in a really interesting spot, because although I do think he is what he is as a prospect, I still think with a true point guard and with better spacing, that I think he can play himself into the first round in 24. I really do. He projects. This is kind of what I think of Terrence in terms of like projecting at the next level. This is how I envision him, right? If all goes well, this is kind of the role and the person I envision him as in the NBA. Okay. He's a potential rotational piece, right? I don't know if Terrence Shannon is going to go. I mean, I would assume it was like National Player of the Year.
Yep.
And he's a role guy in the NBA. Now he obviously can climb in his career. There's no question. And with Io, you probably can't count him out for that. But for Terrence, he's a rotational guy, knock down open shots, right? Defend at a high level and do whatever is asked of you. That's what he would be at the next level. And I look at a guy like Moses Moody. I mean, 6'6", 210. Terrence is probably a better athlete. Moses has more length. But that's kind of the archetype, right? Like, maybe if he gets into the late first round next year, let's say he comes back, gets into the late first round, Terrence Shannon being on a contender, maybe he's an 8th, 9th guy. He can come in. He's tough. Like, he can knock down shots with the spacing that you have in the NBA. That's what I see for him. That's kind of what I think he projects out to be. But there's the other side of it too, where look, you can't project your decision based off of where you are in the mocks. And if you're a first rounder, sure. Okay, like if the mocks have you going in the lottery, by all means. But for these second rounders, the reason why you really have to be careful is because these mock drafts rarely, and I'm talking rarely, ever factor in the international influx in the draft. I mean, go back.
They just don't want to take up a roster spot, right? Like, they don't have
draft and
money.
stash.
They don't have the roster spot. They just don't want to spend it. Like, not everybody has enough spots to fill their draft picks. I mean, Oklahoma City can't draft enough guys. They're going to sell some picks or whatever it is. So yeah, that's got to factor into what, 10 picks, 15 picks.
Yeah. And then on top of that too, it's like, look at the, Gavoni right now. If you look at the ESPN mock, there's 6 total international prospects on that mock. 6. There were 9 in the second round last year. So that's why that mid 40s range, you think because you're not in the 50s that you're safe. You're not. I mean, Brandon Paul leading NBADraft.net, which credible, not credible, pretty credible. I think Brandon Paul was projected like 44th to the Minnesota Timberwolves, like the night before the draft, and he went undrafted. And that can happen. And now you slide out, you're an undrafted free agent, and the mountain gets a little bit steeper. And now you're in the draft, like you can't come back. So I don't know. I think for both of them, they have something to gain from coming back, but also, I don't know. Some guys hate school. That's what we always never factor in is like, oh, why wouldn't you want to come back? It's like, I don't know. Maybe I want to sit in another like RST class.
Yeah. And listen, I know the calculus has changed because you can make money playing college basketball now, Mike, but some guys just want to go get a job playing basketball and do that for 40 hours a week instead of 20 hours a week. right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I trust me, like I've seen it. Like it's, you see guys all over the years. If a decision doesn't make sense in your eyes, then you have to look a little bit deeper than just the basketball side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think some guys, maybe it's they want the challenge. Maybe they just want to move on to the next thing. Maybe they think that if they spend their entire day in a gym as opposed to spending half their day in a classroom, that they can get even better. They can develop even more, and then they can become a better player. So I don't know. I mean, we've talked about, I mean, you and I have shared, I don't know how many texts over the past, month since the season ended, month plus since the season ended, where it's like, what, this is fascinating, right? Like, what's going to happen? How's this going to play out? Because the one thing that I know for sure is that it rarely plays out the way you think it's going to play out.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's already starting to show itself, because I think if you ask when the season ended, you're like, well, Coleman's coming back and it'd be Terrence the one that leaves. Now we're starting to see it's the opposite. And I wouldn't be surprised if it changed again.
That's right.
Like there's so much that's subject to change because things haven't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what a kid tells you, hey, I'm coming back. Like I said, they're not being dishonest. There's just material changes that happen. And the combine and workouts, like those things, like Caleb Houston last year, maybe it was like a kick-ass workout he had with the Magic where he went 17 for 20 in a shooting drill. And they're like, oh, cool. We'll sit him in the corner next year.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not going to win a ton, and we already have a pick early in the second round. So let's just take it on this guy.
Yep.
It's for sure happen with one of these two guys.
Absolutely. Well, Mike LaTulip, great stuff as always. I'm sure in a week or two we'll have some answers here, get closer to the answer. So we'll catch up with you then, man.
Appreciate it, man.